The world is changing fast. New technologies are impacting how we think about products, services, and the way we live our lives. Nowhere is this trend more present than in financial services, where new business models and customer expectations are changing our conceptions about banking, finance, and the very nature of money. Welcome to Rebank, a visionary podcast about banking, fintech, and the future. The future of banking is here.
Hello and welcome to Rebank. I'm your host, Will Beeson. Today we're thrilled to be joined by Benedetta Arese Lucini. Benedetta is the co-founder of Oval Money, an app helping people save more and improve their financial lives. Prior to starting Oval Money, Benedetta ran Uber in Italy, launching it in that country and running it for 3 years. And what a journey that was. We get into that experience, which is mind-blowing. In addition to her interest in tech and fintech, Benedetta is an advocate for political reform and women's rights in Italy and a radio broadcaster. It was a blast catching up with Benedetta and getting into some of her personal story. Let us know what you think of today's episode. Tweet at us at Rebank Podcast or connect on LinkedIn or Facebook. Thank you very much for joining us today. Please welcome Benedetta Arese Lucini. Benedetta, welcome to Rebank.
Thank you.
I think you have the longest LinkedIn profile of anyone I've ever met. You've had like 20 jobs, and for people who can't see you, you're young. You've lived in the US, the UK, Asia, Europe. You've worked in finance, film, media, investments, and tech. You're clearly more than the average fintech founder. How would you describe yourself?
I think I describe myself as an entrepreneur. And even though this is the first time I'm actually co-founding a company, most of the jobs I've done in my career have always had this kind of entrepreneurial spirit with them. And so I've always loved digital and technology. And that kind of thread is throughout my whole career. And I've liked to space it through different industries because you learn a lot about trying to disrupt the old-fashioned industry.
So you're obviously comfortable following various interests wherever they lead. I mean, are you driven by like traditional entrepreneurial success? Like is your goal to found a company that becomes next Facebook, or is it, I don't know, what are the most interesting outlets for you and how far can you pursue those?
So it's interesting because actually I think I wanted to be an entrepreneur since the very early age. My dad is an entrepreneur, so I used to go into his office when I was like 10 or 12, and he used to have one of the first like personal computers, and the one thing I fell in love was, yes, the computer, but also like the idea of the desk and this chair, the like desk chairs, which swirl. And I thought, okay, my job is to be sitting on a chair and typing on a computer like he does. And I thought that was being an entrepreneur. And so, but what drove me to continue pursuing this career was not success in the traditional manner. So I don't think I want a company that is the next Facebook. I look for meaning and mission in everything I do. And so for me, there has to be like, for me, my success is like the everyday, some customer who writes you a nice email that tells you, I love your product, you're changing my life in certain ways. So for me, the success is much more intrinsic rather than like external. So, and I like to use though the power of being, you know, a woman in a sort of a non-conventional role to influence and let people know that it's possible and influence the next generation of founders. So that's like for me what success means.
We had a guy, Lex Sokolin, on a few weeks ago who started and sold a robo-advisory business in the US, and he also has an active interest in some I think a creative media startup, and also does some art on the side. Just love that idea of pursuing both kind of tech entrepreneurship in the more traditional business sense and also creative outlets at the same time.
Yeah, so I I like the radio, and as you know, and I also write, and I have my column on a newspaper, one of the leading newspapers in Italy, La Stampa. And so I like to try and be creative. I grew up in a family of like STEM people. So my dad is an engineer, my mom is a mathematician, and me and my sisters, even though we're all girls, we grew up being like surrounded by numbers. So, I think it helps to be using both sides of the brain.
So you mentioned your dad was an entrepreneur, and it sounds like that informed some of your professional thinking. I mean, are there any specific ways in which you think that's informed your decision making? I don't know. I mean, people always think of entrepreneurs as being risk takers. Now, I think that's probably a mischaracterization, but I think there is a certain level of comfort with understanding risk and return that informs one's decision making.
Yes and no. I think that the really interesting part about my dad's influence was more about the multitasking aspect and the idea of being able to handle different aspects of a job. And I think this is the one thing that I really learned from both my career and now in Oval Money as a founder, is the fact that you really need to juggle from talking to lawyers, talking to government, to doing a marketing campaign, to talking to the press. And so this kind of multitasker aspect that I used to see in my dad from his phone calls or people who he would bring home, always inspired me, because I feel like in my career I always wanted this like upward curve and learning by doing sort of thing. And so I think that's kind of the direction I took. My dad never was very forceful, like he never tried to get us into this technology world, and we sort of all happened to go into it a little by chance, me and my sisters. So we all kind of got a longer route. You know, I studied economics and thought I would work in as a banker for all my life. And actually, after a few years, I realized it wasn't my path. So I think he was like subtly influencing us, never really directly.
Well, personally, I'm glad the financial crisis happened when it did. Otherwise, I'm sure I would still be in investment banking, and wow, so glad that's not the case. Yeah. So your current company is called Oval Money. Yeah. Tell us a bit about that.
Yes. So first of all, the name Oval is, for us, it has a meaning. Like obviously the word, first of all, it's actually a word that can be translated in most languages. It kind of has the same pronunciation, which is very interesting. It also gives you the sense of continuity, because it's like a circle, it's a continuous object or shape, and then it has the word value in it because it's oval, and so we really believe that we want to create value for users. What we do is we've created a platform that allows anybody, and this is the really important part, to access and understand better their personal finance life. And the idea is to give a tool in the hands of people that allows them to track better how they spend, learn how to spend better, but most importantly, learn how to do saving in a sort of behavioral and dynamic way. And this pool of saving that gets stored in a wallet will give users access to a lot of different investment opportunities that we are building on a marketplace platform. So we want to get like in the hands of people the same way that, at a certain level, private bankers do for people who have a lot of initial capital. We want to give that same sort of service in a sort of digital manner to everyone.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so in practice, how will it work? Individual signs up. Do they link multiple accounts that they have?
Yes, so an individual signs up to the app. It's an app on iOS and Android for today, not desktop, just mobile. They decide what banks they want to link, and they can link multiple banks. Today we do it with a technology called screen scraping. Next year, with the new regulation, PSD2 will allow us to link directly to their bank. And what we read is all the transactions that they do with their cards. And by reading this information, we allow users to set certain behaviors that allow them to do micro saving. And the behaviors can be like just rounding up to the closest pound, whatever expense you've done, and moving that certain pence into that spare change, let's say, into your wallet, in your saving account. Or we also allow to choose to use some like saving rules, which we call steps. And these, like, for example, if you go to the restaurant very often, like I do, you just put a step that says every time I go to the restaurant, put like, 2% more of what I've spent away in saving, or 5%, or whatever you want. And then we've recently released the opportunity to allow users to link saving to their social media activity. So they can link their Facebook or Twitter accounts and say, every time I tweet or post on Facebook, save like £1. And so this allows people to sort of feel a little less the burden of saving, which has always been one of the big challenges. People find it like boring and difficult. And so by putting like very little amounts at the time every week, actually these add up quite well. Our average user saves about £130 per month. And this is more than the amount that 40% of the UK population has in savings, because they are usually £100 in total. So we're actually getting to a positive behavior.
So connecting to, I would imagine, a range of banks and financial institutions across countries has to be hugely complicated and time consuming. Do you have a specific geographic focus for now? Are there specific countries that you're operating in?
Yeah, so actually our technology allows us to work with banks in most of Europe and the UK. Europe, when I talk about Europe, I talk about Eurozone. But we are currently focused on Italy and the UK as our first two countries. And they're very different in terms of user behavior. So it gives us also a real good insight into how culturally, different countries deal with saving and investing.
That's actually one of the topics I wanted to pick up, because it must be fascinating. Just thinking about culturally, different cultures have different risk tolerances generally, different approaches to saving. Certain countries have more of a kind of public pension system, auto enrollment here in the UK, which kind of require pension saving, which is then dispersed to people after they retire, and it can often be a tremendous percentage of their final working salary. Other countries expect people to save privately for their retirement. In some countries, people have higher disposable income or higher propensity to save. How do you kind of think about those cultural differences and build them into a product which is going to be relevant for users in different places? Yeah, so
one of the most interesting things is that actually Italy is one of those countries where our government has the highest debt in the world, but we're actually the country with the highest per capita saving in the whole of Europe. So Italians are very used to saving, and we see it much more as a tool that people see as a way to facilitate saving, whilst in the UK, where it's a very much credit-driven sort of society, we actually do a lot more work about education and trying to teach people that actually they should try and spend a little less. But the answer to your question and how we deal with it is data. So one of the great parts of technology is that you have new tools and what gets called loosely artificial intelligence or machine learning or big data. And these are all buzzwords, but what they really mean is that machines have the power to crunch through a lot of numbers very quickly. And so you can put a set of numbers, and these are generally anonymous because obviously for privacy, but you put them through a certain algorithm and they can spot certain behaviors, and therefore you can target the app towards certain users. One of the experiments we're doing now with our data about spending, for example, is to look at how much people spend on recurring items. And you would be surprised that very often, like over 50% of a person's monthly expenditure is in recurring items. And so like just spotting this and like outlining it for for certain users can show them how like they can cut out like one of their 10 different monthly subscriptions to entertainment and can save a lot of money. So these are the kind of things that by using data you can adapt to not only cultural differences but also within a certain groups differences, because women are very different than men in the way they manage their finances, and a 20-year-old is very different from a 40-year-old, and we have all of these people on our platform.
So it sounds like the initial focus is on savings, but I understand there's a marketplace component also as part of the vision. Yeah.
So the idea is that if you don't have initial capital, it's very hard to do investments. So the initial idea was always the concept of giving access to financial products. And this is because I also come from my financial background. And financial products are very often, the best ones are always limited to like private banking and individuals who have a lot of capital. And so what happens is that the rich get richer. That's kind of this big concept in finance and the big problem. And so the idea is like, okay, so how can we bring products through a digital app that are usually open only to higher income individuals to everybody? And that's how we're building our marketplace. So we allow fund managers to insert their, let's say, onboard their product, their fund on our app, and then our users can select that. And obviously, for the fund manager, having a user that sends them 100 euros a month is not that interesting. But once we send them 1,000 people who send them 100 euros a month, that starts to become very interesting money for them. So we're like crowd investing in certain products. And to provide that access, though, we realized that we did have to start with some kind of initial capital. So therefore, we built the saving part just to allow users to understand that they had to start building up this kind of recurring behavior of putting some capital aside. And then they could start to get access to these products.
Slightly technical question. So I understand how screen scraping works in terms of pulling in data from various sources, but it sounds like you're both pulling in the data and also initiating certain transactions. So if you're talking about rounding up a spare change and pushing it into a wallet, or sending 2% of a restaurant bill into that wallet, how does that payments component currently work?
Yeah, so today we work with a e-money provider. They have a license to hold the money, and we do direct debit, which is the easiest way to, let's say, sort of move money today in the European and the UK market. And it's becoming the cheapest because with regulation, this charge has gone down a lot over the years. I don't know if you remember, but banking a long time ago, like just to send transactions between two accounts, it could cost you even £10. Right now, it's usually a half a pound or a pound, nothing. And actually, if you go underneath, so you cut the intermediary, you get to a very small cents. So.
Yeah, in the SEPA area, certainly.
Yeah, exactly.
I think in other parts of the world, it's still hugely costly.
Yeah.
No, interesting. And I guess as PSD2 rolls out, do you guys expect to apply for authorization as an account information service provider and or a payment initiation service provider?
So I think we've actually received our license today from the FCA recently as an arranger in it's called Arranging Deals in Investments. We believe that Fintech is quite interesting because if you look at the space in general, it's a very layered and tiered sort of business. So every startup kind of focuses on one layer of the business. And, if you look at a traditional bank, they probably do most of it. And instead, if you look at the fintechs, they kind of each tackle one little piece of a bank. And there will be a lot of consolidation for sure. But we see ourselves as the technology platform that kind of links together fund managers and users, which are potential investors. And so we want to focus on this part of the market and use external partnerships and partners for the payment provider side. Then you never know as you grow if it makes sense to internalize or keep it external. But generally, there's quite a lot of companies that do payment very successfully, and they have the right technology to do so. So it makes a lot of sense for us to partner.
So it sounds great, and there's clearly broader market buy-in. You guys have received multiple startup awards and grants, including one from KBanca, one of the most prominent digital banks in Italy. Do you know Roberto Ferrari?
Yes, we know him very well.
He's a friend.
He's actually our advisor.
Oh,
so
right, nice.
He's on our advisory board. He knows us very well, and he's a big fan of Oval. He always tells us we should charge more, and he really believes in what we're trying to do, because it's interesting. In Italy, actually, we don't have any incumbent bank player like the Monzo's number 26 that is born in Italy. But we actually have quite a few sort of just like digital banks like KBanca that are born after Banca Sella.
I was a Fineco customer for years. So
yes.
Fabulous. Best banking experience I think I've ever had.
Yeah, so we've actually had our fair share of good banking experience, but hosted by traditional banks, let's say, for a while. And if you think about it, PostePay is a debit card with an app, which is done from the postal office service, but it's just like a Monzo card if you want. Of course, the interaction is not the same, and the end user experience is not as good. But if you look at the product per se, we started using these kind of products early on, especially because we're a country where credit cards are not that used. So we had to move into more debit card products and prepaid cards a long time ago.
Well, tell Roberto hi next time you talk to him.
I will do.
So, I guess in addition to that grant, what was it, 25K from KBanca? Yeah. And but you've also raised 1.2 million euros from Intesa Sanpaolo.
Yeah, we raised the money from actually B Ventures, which is a corporate VC in Italy, and they're owned by, they were an Italian company called B Ventures, and they got bought by Docomo Digital, so it's NTT Data, one of the biggest Japanese companies, which is interesting, and then a few family offices in Italy. And then, yes, with Intesa, we did a funding partnership, which was sort of a debt equity deal, and it's also granted with a guarantee by the government. It's a startup program for startups. And again, Stefano Barrese, which is a very senior, he's the head of all the retail business in Intesa, is one of our advisors. So we like to surround ourselves with people that are smarter than us.
Wow, that sounds excellent. Sounds like you guys are doing great work. And then I also understand you're launching a crowdfunding campaign in January.
Yes, we're very excited about this because we really believe that to create a product that is for the end user, we need investors and let's say people who believe in us that are our end customers as well. And so we believe that crowdfunding, and it was always in our plans, is the greatest way to really interact with your users because they are fully committed in what you do. And we really believe that this sort of commitment helps us grow. One of the interesting parts, we're a team of 12 today, and except for me, nobody else in my team has a background in finance. And we actually choose this purposely because we finance people get bogged down in our words and our terms, and we don't really realize what it means to create products for the normal person. And so by hiring developers and marketers who are used to just using a banking app and who know the frustration with those services that exist in the market, we can actually go and target and get a better product. So for us, crowdfunding is again a way to approach our community and to get them to really believe and back the product, as well as, if the product does well, participate in its growth. So we're launching in January on Crowdcube. And we look forward to having a very diverse set of investors that will come from all over Europe. Yeah.
Great. So you mentioned that you're an entrepreneur by background, and Oval Money isn't your first company. I suppose as far as tech startups go, maybe scale-ups in this specific case, you have considerable experience. You ran Uber in Italy for a couple of years, I think.
Yeah, 3 years.
What was that experience like?
Uber in Italy was an incredible experience because I actually entered into Uber when it was a startup. It was a 100-person team. Outside of the US, we were maybe 10. And it was just starting to launch and see if what they had tried to build as a product in the US actually worked abroad. Travis was a great leader, and he really believed in this mission of bringing, making transport as easy as running water, he would say. And I think it was the first time I really got involved in this whole Silicon Valley startup culture, which has a lot of difficulties in certain things, but actually has a real great spirit of enabling everybody in the firm to feel like an entrepreneur, which I think is something which is growing here in the startup community in Europe, but it wasn't as profound as it is in Silicon Valley. So when I joined as a general manager, it was very clear that every general manager had the control of its city or its country, and you really were running it as if you were the CEO of that company. And you still had this connection with all the cities around the world, and there was a little bit of competition and a little bit of help that you gave each other. So the experience was incredible because we went from a company of 100 when I joined, 150, something like this, to when I left in 3 years, a company of 6,000 people. So you really learn what it means to be a manager, which probably was one of the biggest challenges, because you go in very, very quickly from managing 2 people to managing 50 people, right? Which is a big change. And then you learn what it means to deal with a lot of entrenched positions that have been around for a long time and who fail to see this innovation as an opportunity, and they just see it as a threat. So other than the experience of Uber as a company, I had to also deal with the experience of Uber as a disruptor in Italian market, where taxi drivers have a huge power and they have a huge political power. And so it was very controversial, let's say, when we launched.
Okay, so that was a very diplomatic way of maybe describing some of the experiences that you had. I think, in my recollection, Uber in Italy had to be one of the most difficult moments in recent startup history. So you have this disruptive company, Uber, shows up in Italy. You have hundreds of thousands, presumably, taxi drivers, black car drivers who have saved up and invested, I think, hundreds of thousands of euros in their medallions, who have an entrenched political lobby, as you mentioned, in a culture that maybe isn't so immediately open to wholly new concepts like Uber. And you've got a young woman running it in a culture where that's certainly not the norm. I mean, that must have been insane.
Yes, it was. It was like being in a movie sometimes. I think that I will always remember that we had our launch party in Italy in March. We started working on Uber in Italy in like February of 2013, and in March we launched the company. And I had signed a contract in February, and I had joined like a few days later, and like 3 days after I joined, I had to like present Uber at this launch party. And we already had like taxi drivers striking under our party before we even launched. And one of the powerful things of Uber was always that they managed to give their politicians and their message thanks to the support they had of the user base. And so they usually got taxi drivers sort of upset after they were growing a little bit. And instead we were like at day one and we already had issues. So on one side it was really tough because it became very personal and there was a lot of harassment to me and the other girls in the team. There was a lot of like having to deal with police and legal issues and politicians, and so talking to a lot of different parties and getting to understand how to promote what we were doing. On the other hand, it was also the most insane experience because Uber became the symbol of change in a country where change wasn't very much happening, nor political, nor anything else. And actually, when we came in, it was probably the years of the biggest depression, economic depression in Italy came not in 2008, the crisis, but a little later. Like our banking crisis happened in 2012-13. And so when we came in, it was everything about Uber was change. And so every single thing that happened that was a bit sort of innovative was always compared as the Uber against taxis sort of world. So we had to go, we lobbied on TV, we lobbied on the newspapers, we lobbied with a lot of like consumer groups to really position Uber as the like new, but the good new against the intrinsic old, and to show that if Italy embraced this new, they would kind of come out of their crisis.
Did you feel like that message resonated?
That message, it resonated so well with our users. Like it really created a sort of super fan base of Uber people, because I think they really dedicated themselves to the cause. We had people writing to us, sending pictures of anything that taxi drivers did wrong. We had like blogs of like people that were really, really vocal. I don't think it helped as much because it put the company a little bit too much in the spotlight, right? So we weren't just a company doing its own business, but we were just become like the topic. It became really political. And so at that point, it's very hard to separate your business from the whole political agenda of one or the other politician who would use Uber pro or against his political campaigns.
And you were squarely in the line of fire. You wrote an amazing TechCrunch article in September, I think it was. So post the Uber experience, but you told one story about how you woke up one morning with a big white sheet strung up right in front of your house with your home address, name listed on it, and some very pointed insults. Underlining the fact that you were a woman and playing on that gender bias. I mean, people here stay home from work for medical stress because the rush hour commute is too crowded. Like you were going through hell.
Yeah, it became very public, and I wrote about it 2 years later because it took me a while to put it in perspective. And the crazy part is that when it happens, harassment happens so much, it kind of becomes, I had like a program I had to go through. Like I knew whenever something about harassment came out, I had to make sure that the press didn't interpret it the wrong way, have to go to the police to make a claim against it. I had to call my team and tell them everything was okay. So you the first thing you did wasn't even like deal with the fact that you were getting harassed, but like just micromanage everything that was coming after it, which was very tough, because when I think about it now, I'm like, I should have spent a little bit more time realizing the gravity of the issue and making a little bit more of a comment about women and society, as I did 2 years later. And so I think this was a big deal. One of the things that hurts me the most, though, is not the fact of the insult per se, but it's always the fact that a young person, or especially a woman, and in Italy the bias is not just sex, gender, so it's not just sexist, but it's also on age. So people think that if you're young, you're not like worth being like running a company. And so these two things, they always assume that you have to do sexual favors to get where you are. And so for me, who I'm so proud of my like career and I work so hard for it, having somebody say all the time that I got there, or I got favors for Uber, I managed to get like the company growth, etc., thanks to my behavior, was the most hurtful part of it all, which is sort of weird because it's a proud thing about my career, and it should be a bigger problem of harassment. But for me, it's that kind of worth that is lost of just because of somebody's, belief that they are in the right.
Oh man, that is just so difficult for me to even conceive of how horrible that position must have been for you, because presumably you weren't supported by the police when you would go report these issues. You weren't supported by the local community, by the press, by politicians. I mean, that was all on your shoulders.
Yeah, I was very much supported, as I wrote before, by Uber, actually, and that's why it's really strange and difficult for me to see the whole press storm around Uber's culture, because actually when I was there, I really felt that there was a really strong sort of cultural bond between people of different cities. And when this happened to me, every single city sent me like a note, and Travis talked about it, and he called me, and like Ryan Graves and like all the like senior people in the firm were very aware of what was happening, and they always told me that if it was too much, and if I wanted to like step away or step out of the light, let's say, I could always have that option. And so I always felt that in the company itself, the support was really, really strong. And that for me, it became like I strongly aligned with the belief of what we were trying to do with Uber, and the way I deeply believe that the product we were bringing is right, it's good. And so for me, it was just now it became a principle, now I have to bring it all the way to the end, because I'm on the right side of it.
No, I mean, you make that connection to a lot of the PR and some of the issues that Uber's having at the moment, or has recently had. Hopefully it's finished. I mean, are you saying you were not aware, never exposed to anything internally at Uber? You were completely shocked and surprised by these recent reports?
So it all started in the engineering team, and to be honest, I wasn't ever that close to the engineering team. I think the problem of Uber is a actual cultural problem in the Silicon Valley in general. There is a tendency for engineers to choose people who are similar to them, and so the like Mark Zuckerberg style guy, Stanford dropout, is like the number one person people look for. But in general, we were quite a few women general managers in the company. Austin, which is she's the head of all the expansion team. She started as an intern in Uber. She really grew to have like a super senior position. And so I always saw Travis as a person who really didn't didn't treat people differently if you were female or male. He just expected people to be always at their best, right? He wanted to take out the best in you, and he also worked super hard to make sure that everybody was always feeling like they had his support. So for me, I never saw that, but I left when the company was probably still small enough, because I left in end of 2015, and so it was still like a 6,000 person company, which is big compared to when I came in. I think one of the biggest struggles in Uber, and I've said this before, is the difficulty of growing a culture from like a team of like 100 to a team of 6,000, where you can't even control the recruiting. Uber was recruiting more people in certain months than they had as the total number of people in the company. So there was always like 80% of the people in the company had been there for less than a year. So when you're in like a company that has this hyper growth, how do you translate the initial culture which was like, yes, I would say not aggressive, but like convinced, like they wanted to get to do what they believed in. They wanted to get their mission, and they wanted to bring this new product and be disruptive. It was for sure a culture of disruptiveness. How do you bring that culture and allow it to grow in a way that it doesn't feel like people are allowed to do things that are not okay? So there's a fine line between, breaking walls and doing things that are unethical.
Wow. Well, certainly a management challenge for you as you guys scale from 12 to 6,000 employees.
Thank you.
One last kind of topic that I just wanted to pick up on, because I just think it's so interesting, and would love to get your insight based on your experience. It's hard for tons of reasons to start a startup in any geography. If it's the UK, if it's the US, like there are tons of things that make it really difficult. But in a place like Italy, in which the bureaucracy, the tax structure, it can be crippling. Like, how do you succeed as an entrepreneur in Italy?
Yeah, so I actually do a little bit of I really like, after Uber, learning about regulation, and I think even the way Oval Money was born was like really studying the structure that we would have, the license we would have, that allowed us to be efficient in every country. So we're actually a holding company in the UK, and we have an operating company in Italy. And operating in Italy is a challenge. So everything takes a lot of time. A lot of things are still done through paperwork. And I think one of the things that are still the hardest is the labor laws. But on the other hand, it's like untapped talent. Italy is one of those countries which has a huge number of engineers, and there's not enough jobs for them, or nobody who's willing to train them to go from having a computer science degree and engineering degree to becoming a startup founder, or like person, right? Because one of the big issues is we don't have the big offices of Google or Facebook or Amazon of the world. And so it's very hard to have those companies train the sort of culture and see people come out. If you look at it, a lot of startup founders have been in a lot of these, like, PayPal, and they're all like some big corporate, like American startup corporate. And in Italy, we don't have this. So for me, it's my most rewarding challenge is to spend time creating culture, and it's the thing I love the most to do. So I love growing the product. I still answer on customer support to my users. I still enjoy this a lot. But creating the culture and allowing people to understand, and hiring people and allowing them to understand what it really means to be part of a startup is the best thing I can do. And if I don't do it in Italy, in the UK, it's very easy, so I like the challenge. We're one of the few startups, I think there's less than 2% of startups in Italy who give stock options to their employees. And we're one of them. So just to give you an idea, and when I send my package to people to tell them, here's your salary and this is the stock options we're going to give to you, I used to receive emails from my potential employees saying, what are stock options? And so it's not even like the attitude to risk taking is very low.
That's really interesting. Actually, I've had a number of friends, startup founders here in the UK, say they have trouble recruiting engineers because they put together base plus equity packages and they get rejected because no one wants equity, which is just mind-blowing. That's the whole point of working
in a startup. Yeah. But my engineers in Italy also don't understand what equity is, and they often don't want it. The one good thing about having people in Italy, and I shouldn't say it too loud because they can always get recruited, is that the fintech space here in the UK is super booming. There's a lot of funding. And so what happens is there is a shortage of talent. So the next startup that gets the big funding round, sort of goes scraping away all the talent from the other smaller ones. And that's the part that I would hate, to not be able to grow the sort of team of my team and keeping it within our company for a while. So this whole movement of employees, I think in the UK now in fintech, it's less than a year the average time a person stays at a startup. And I work with third-party startups here in the UK who I change the sales rep that talks to us, I've changed them 2 or 3 times. Or I go to the offices of startups and every time they give me a new address because they're getting bigger and they change. So it's super, super, super fast growth, and that doesn't allow you to, and a lot of poaching, let's say, and so that doesn't allow you to create the culture. So yes, Italy is extremely complicated with labor laws. It's still very hard. They've changed a little bit. They're making them better. And it's really hard for more than bureaucracy, because on startups, they've done quite a bit of stuff on culture. Risk tolerance is very low. And so, but I like the challenge. I really think if you don't go and do startup in a place where, startup founders, what do? They try to fix a problem. So I'm trying to fix a little problem in Italy, one problem at a time. But if I don't try to do it there, I wouldn't feel like I'm a proper entrepreneur.
Love it. And I love the fact that you take that kind of cultural development and even employee development piece so seriously, because I should have said for context for the audience, I lived in Italy for a year, so I have a pretty good sense of Italy culturally, and there are some of the most highly trained, highly qualified university graduates with multiple undergraduate and master's degrees who just aren't able to access the sorts of attractive work opportunities that one might find in the US, in the UK, and parts of Northern Europe. I mean, it's a travesty that there aren't better job opportunities for those people who can deliver at the highest levels, and you're clearly putting those people to work, which I think is fabulous.
It's a good way. Another thing we're doing is in Italy there's a policy that is called the coming back of the brains. So it's attracting back our brains, because London is one of the biggest...
The opposite of the brain drain, right?
Yeah.
Brain drain for years.
Yes. And so now it's how do we attract back the brains? Because London is probably the 4th largest city of Italians in the world. So there's a lot of people who are living in the UK. And so how do we attract them back? And, Brexit is sort of helping this. And in my small part, like a quarter of my company, actually nearly a third of my company is of people who've come back from abroad. And so even this is kind of interesting. If there is a good job opportunity, people come back to Italy because the quality of life, and you've lived there, is amazing. So it's just a question of creating the right incentives and the right environment for people to come back. And this is one of the things I really like to work on. And Uber gave me the opportunity to have a voice and to have a recognized voice in Italy, which not many other companies would have given me. And so I use this voice to, push on this kind of concept and mission all the time. Like I even decided to launch the startup in Italy with all the difficulties of doing this and of having user base that is much more complicated than in the UK. We decided to have an office in Italy and have employees there. And I have a column, as I said, and I write about stories of other entrepreneurs that in Italy are doing really great things that nobody talks about. And I have the radio program also where I interview entrepreneurs and they tell me about their stories. And so this is my way. And I hope it does something, but it's my way to sort of create and entrench that culture within a society where startups are seen. When you say you're a startup entrepreneur in Italy, people think you're unemployed.
Yeah, I'm sure it's the case in a lot of countries.
Yes, but here it's becoming like a career. Like if you want to be in a startup, even if that startup fails, you can go somewhere else. So being in a startup, it's a bit of a career. In countries where job transfer is quite easy, I think in Italy it's still really seen. Just to give you numbers, there's 1 million people working in startups just in London. In the whole of Italy, there's 35,000 people working in startups.
Wow.
Yeah. So we have a lot of work to do.
We could talk about this for a long time.
Yeah.
But maybe we should take a breather. Maybe we'll pick it up at some point in the future. Benedetta, what's the best way for people to find out more about Oval Money and connect with you directly?
Yes, so always people can contact me directly. If they write on the chat help of Oval Money, or if they write at our email address hello@ovalmoney.com, I answer it. So I always get all the emails, any advice and anything that doesn't work with the app, any suggestion is always more than welcome. And to learn more about Oval Money, we have a website, www.ovalmoney.com. You can go on YouTube channel and we have a few videos that explain how we work and what we do. And if you're interested in our crowdfunding campaign, you can go to invest.ovalmoney.com and you will find a lot of information there also.
Great. Benedetta Arese Lucini, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for saying my name so perfectly.
Thanks for tuning into Rebank. If you liked today's show, reach out. Follow us on Twitter at Rebank Podcast and join the conversation. For more on banking, fintech, and the future, check out our regular content at www.bankingthefuture.com.